Today I'm looking at this overhead rig behind me that I've showed in a lot of videos in the past, but never done a video about it on its own. But now, that's what I'm gonna do. So this is an overhead rig. And what do I mean by an overhead rig? I mean, this is where I do my unboxings and my product reviews, many of them anyway. And at first glance, this may look like a complicated setup, but in reality, it's not. It's super easy, and for the most part, it is a DIY setup. I'm gonna show you how I put this together and how you can do something like this in your studio as well. So if you followed my channel for a while, you know I used to work out of a large actual studio. And I still do work out of that on bigger shoots. But during the pandemic, I moved my everyday office / studio home and actually into a shed. So I'm working out of a home studio shed. And by the way, if you want to see how I built this shed, check out this card here and I'll put a link in the description. On my second YouTube channel, I put together a series on how I built a shed and turned it into a home studio. But back to my office and the studio I used to work out of, that's where I originally put this setup together. And so I've used this now for the better part of 1.5 years, going on 2 years. And it's really worked out great. And for those that don't understand what I'm talking about, an overhead shot is just that. There's a camera mounted over a table looking down onto the tabletop, and that way you can do unboxings or product reviews or whatever you want to do. These are very commonplace, but the way they're put together, I think, is very different in pretty much every studio you see. And you can actually buy these rigs, these actual bars that you can hang your camera on. There are manufacturers that make these specifically for that use, but that's not what I did. I'll get to that in just a minute. The rig is really made up of several key components, and the main one is the rig I was just talking about. It's the bar that goes across the top and it has legs. Then there's a tabletop, and then there are lights hanging, and there's a camera and a monitor. And then there's also a microphone. So when I pull my chair up, I have a mic already set up. And that's the beauty of this setup. It's very quick to use. I can just sit down, turn the lights on, the camera, and I'm ready to roll. The number one thing I've learned doing YouTube is you gotta make it easy to do shoots, otherwise you won't do them. I do weekly videos, and so ever since I put this table together, it has really made my workflow much more efficient. So now we'll break down what each piece is. The first thing is the table, and this is a really simple table I bought from IKEA. I think this particular model was about $100. And if you've shopped at IKEA, you know that usually the legs are separate. And that was the case with this one. And so I had to buy 2 legs, and they are sawhorse style. And so this table actually just sits on top of these legs. This was a very affordable solution. I like the color of it, which I use most of the time, although I can swap out what I'm shooting, and I'll show that in just a minute. But you could of course use any table, but this one's worked out nice for me. And then the thing that makes this an overhead shot, and probably the most important element to this setup, is the bar here. And this is what I hang the camera on, the lights, etc. Now this is not some sort of custom bar that I had made or that I welded myself or that I bought from a company that makes these. Believe it or not, this is just a clothes rack. I bought it off Amazon. And by the way, I'll put links in the description to everything I'm talking about, so if you want to build your own setup, you can check that out. This rack was perfect for my needs because of its height. I wanted the camera to be 3 or so feet above the tabletop. And so some of the ones you can buy that are pre-made were too short for my taste. They didn't have the height and they weren't as adjustable. Now, there are a variety of those in the market, but this one's worked out very well, and it was affordable, and it also will hold a crazy amount of weight. And so you should have no problem putting pretty much any kind of camera on this rig. Now, I wouldn't hang a huge camera. I will get to my camera in just a minute, but any kind of mirrorless or DSLR camera will be fine with this setup. Or of course, you can mount your smartphone and get good results with that too. And that's very light. The other thing too is this has wheels on it. And so you can easily move this around back and forth depending on what you're shooting. And I find that to be a big help. And also, my setup doesn't work great for this, but if you had a table that was easily moved, you could also move the overhead rig very easily because again, both sides have wheels and you can easily move it around. And so for my general shooting setup, I have 2 lights. They're LED lights. They're from Generay. These could be any kind of lights though, but you want to have soft light. I even considered using tube lights here, but these lights worked out better for what I'm doing, and they are dimmable. You can control the brightness depending on what you're shooting. And then I have a deity mic that is wired to the stand. I have a freewell monitor, and then I'm using a Canon XC10 camera. The nice thing about this Canon is it has this flip up screen. And so I've got it flipped up and it's stationary like that. And that way when I'm shooting here, if I'm standing, I can easily see the screen, or if I'm sitting, I have the monitor down here to look at it. And then I also like this particular model. It has a flip up door where my cards go. It's got CFast or SD cards. They make a newer version of this, the XC15. This is an XC10, so it's several years old, but it shoots 4K Canon log, and it's a great camera for this kind of stuff. And then again, I got this monitor here. It's just a cheap freewell monitor. I think it was like 120 bucks. It works perfect for what I'm doing here. It's connected to my Canon camera via HDMI, and I just leave it mounted here. And that way, when I'm sitting here, I can easily see what I'm shooting. I highly recommend having something like this set up all the time if you're doing overhead shots. And then I mentioned the deity mic earlier. This is a deity V mic. This isn't the FiLMiC Pro. And this is a very good mic. I've been super pleased with this, and I leave it mounted on here permanently. And I have a cable here that I leave. And so I can take this cable and run it into whatever camera I'm shooting. I often shoot with my Canon up here and my Sony down here. And then sometimes I'll use an iPhone as well as another camera, another angle, or even a GoPro or an Osmo action camera. But again, having this stuff set up and ready to go is a huge time saver and makes it to where I can just sit down and start shooting. One thing too I want to mention is these lights run on Sony batteries. These are the big NP style. And so they last for days at a time. But I like having battery powered lights up here instead of having cords, because that way it makes it a little more portable. I can move it around as needed, and then I don't have to mess with additional cables. But of course, if you wanted to, you could run a cable up along the bar and then down to the floor. So you have options, but for me, I like using batteries. Two other important things about the lights is I have a safety on here. And so I'm using these clamps on the bar to hold the light. I have a clamp and then it has a spud on it where I can tighten the light onto that. But then I have a safety. I do the same thing with my camera. Anytime you're hanging lights above something, whether it's a person or, a breakable product, always a good idea to have a safety involved. And the other thing is I've got some black wrap on this light. This light doesn't have barn doors. And so I wanted to flag the light off the wall. Without that, the light spills all over the wall. And that way on my second camera angle where I'm not looking at the table, the back wall is not completely washed out. If you get lights that have barn doors or that are more controllable, you may not need that, but it's just something to keep in mind. And then along this back wall, I have a LED also. This one's an RGB LED. That way I can put a color on there if I want. Sometimes I do. Sometimes I just leave it the same color as these lights and make it white light, 5600 usually. But this is also adjustable. I have it on an arm, and it's also adjustable because it articulates. It's a specific kind of light that has an arm built into it as well. But it's just a real versatile light that, again, I use as a background light. And then over here on the left side, I have what is arguably my favorite feature of this setup. It's not really, but it is very cool to have, and it is a shelf. And the shelf, I put various tools on it. I've got Sharpies, I've got a color checker, and then I've got a multi-tool to undo different tripod mounts, etc. And then I have a shelf down here. I've got tripods on it. Always want a pair of scissors if you're opening, unboxing stuff. And then I've got a little drawer down here that has a bunch of different tripods and stuff in it, different mounts, depending on what I'm shooting. And so it's just nice to have this right here next to the tabletop shot, the overhead shot setup to use as needed. And then on the far top corner here, I also have a GoPro that I can shoot for behind the scenes. If I'm doing an unboxing or a product review video, I could do a behind the scenes shot. Although I don't do this very often. I've done it some, but I need to do it more. And all the clamps and the various connections I'm using are from SmallRig. And again, I'll put links to everything in the description of this video for you to check out. But I find those to be very affordable and very solid options for rigging stuff. SmallRig, I guess their name works. And then these gimbals are gimbals that I actually use, and I just use them on this table as a prop. And so I like to have something there depending on what I'm shooting. If I'm doing another gimbal review, I wouldn't have those in the shot. But for most things, it's just good to have a prop in the shot. Of course, you could use whatever you want as a prop. So earlier I mentioned changing out the color of what I'm shooting on. And the way you do that is by putting down different colors behind it, different mats, whatever, cardboard, it can be anything. This is actually a cutting mat. And so you would put that down below the product or whatever it is, center it up under the camera, and then you've got a different looking background. And with the shot, I could zoom in and completely have the background be this, or I could loosen up the shot a little bit and show the edges. I mentioned cardboard. You could put cardboard under here, any color you want. You could put black, you could put white. So there's a lot of possibilities here to keep it interesting. And then one last thing I did is I put sound panels on the back wall and a few on the ceiling. This does help knock down the reverb in this room. And I'll go over more of that once I do a full studio tour, which I am planning to do that as well. This is just one part of the actual room that I make my videos in. So how much did all this cost? Well, you gotta remember, I had most of the stuff, meaning the gear, before I actually built the overhead rig. The overhead rig itself was a few $100s for the table and the actual metal piping that holds everything up. So that's not very expensive. When you add the lights in, the lights were like $70 a piece. The mic is just under 100. The monitor is about 130. That camera was 2,500 new, but of course you could use any kind of camera that you prefer or that you already have. And then the RGB light on the back wall is just under 100. So if you were starting from scratch and were buying everything minus maybe the camera, you can probably get into this for about 600 to 700, depending on the brand you buy. Well, there you go. That is my DIY overhead rig. Hopefully this gave you some ideas on how to create something like this in your studio space. So if you built something similar, let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, guys. This is Blake Calhoun. Please like, subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.